Yeah, before you even ask the question, this is what you're going to hear in the background because there's no way I'm operating without this bad boy today. What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled in spirit, as always, by Nerd Teas, because it's too bloody hot for a cup of tea today. As I'm filming this, it's about 28, 29 degrees Celsius outside, and it's only climbing, so your boy's a little moist today. He's a little sweaty. Speaking of sweaty, kind of sweating the picks a little bit from last week. Not a week that we're accustomed to, not a week that I'm overly comfortable with. Only went 2-2 straight up last week. That has us at 8-4 on the season. That's perfectly fine. The bad one was 1-3 against the spread. That is not good enough. That is not acceptable. That's got us at 5-7. We did go 2-2 on the over-under. Still comfortable with that mark at 7-5. As promised from last week, here are the current standings in the CFL for 2018. We'll start in the East Division as we typically will. Hamilton leading the way, 2 wins, 1 loss, outscoring opponents by an average of 28-22. Ottawa is 1-1, outscoring opponents 27-21. Montreal did get their first win of the season. They are 1-2 now, but being outscored 32-14 on average. And Toronto sitting at 0-2, got terrible news about their quarterback, which we will talk about. 0-2 being outscored 34-13. In the West, the Calgary Stamps, who have the bye week this week, are a perfect 3-0, outscoring opponents 31-12, picking up right where they left off last season. Edmonton 2-1, outscoring opponents 32-30. BC, the BC Lions, are an even 1-1, but they're being outscored on average 26-22. Winnipeg, 1 win and 2 losses, but outscoring opponents by an average of 34-25. Right now, they are the best offense in the CFL. Saskatchewan, 1-2, also got bad news about their quarterback, being outscored 27-20. Another 4-game schedule on tap here for Week 4. We've got Hamilton traveling to Saskatchewan to take on the Roughriders. We've got Ottawa traveling to Montreal to take on the Alouettes. Edmonton traveling to Toronto to take on the Argos, and the BC Lions traveling to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers. So let's start with that first game, Hamilton-Saskatchewan. Hamilton coming off of a 31-17 win last week over Winnipeg, and as I mentioned, lead the East Division at 2-1. Jeremiah Masoli at quarterback, another tremendous game for the Ticats last week. Masoli currently leading the CFL in completions, passing yards, as well as completion percentage. He went 31 of 41 last week. That's 76%. 369 yards, put up a touchdown, did throw a pick, but that was Masoli's 8th straight 300-yard game. Mercer Timmons, who we talked about last week, had a big coming out party with a massive game, the game of his professional career. He really struggled to follow up on last week's yardage. He only got 13 yards on 7 carries in that game last week. However, he did still score 2 touchdowns. That's 4 touchdowns in 2 weeks for Mercer Timmons. The Ticats had 4 receivers that had at least 5 catches and at least 55 yards. Brandon Banks leading the way for the Ticats in that game. 11 catches for 111 yards. 1-1, 1-1-1. Simone Lawrence on the defense at linebacker, 7 tackles. He also had a sack. And Hamilton had the greatest time of possession from last week, 37 minutes and 30 seconds. On the other side here, we got the Roughriders. They lost that game against Montreal last week, 23-17. That's not a good performance from the Roughriders, and the news only got worse. Zach Collaros going to miss the next 4 to 6 weeks with what was deemed a head injury, but we all know what that is. So, in Collaros' place, kind of a quarterback carousel here with Saskatchewan, and that's all based on performance. Brandon Bridge, who came in Week 2 in relief of Collaros, he only went 8 of 18. That's only 44%. threw for $111 and threw 2 interceptions. He was replaced by David Watford in, I believe, the third quarter. Watford didn't fare a ton better, went 10 for 22. That's only 46%, so at least, yes, it's a little bit higher. Threw for $108, only 108 yards. He did throw a touchdown, but he also threw 2 interceptions. 4 interceptions between the Roughriders' 2 backup quarterbacks. Now, he did at least add 5 carries and 21 yards on the ground, so he was at least a little bit dangerous with his feet. But he was about the only one. Saskatchewan as a team combined for just 60 yards rushing on 21 carries. That's less than 3 yards per carry. Even in the CFL, that ain't going to get it done. Now, Naaman Roosevelt, it's Naaman, so pronounce that as you will, wide receiver for Saskatchewan, did have himself a decent game, was basically the only offensive threat, 6 catches, 73 yards, and the 1 touchdown. Riders did have some bright spots on the defense. Sam Hurl, who was a linebacker for them, he led the team with 8 tackles. I believe that was the most in that game. Charleston Hughes, who we've talked about, I believe, every week on this show, had 3 tackles and his CFL leading 4th sack. If they want to turn it around, an easy place to start, you gotta play more disciplined. Saskatchewan got called for 11 penalties in that game against Montreal. Would have obviously been the worst of the 2 teams if the other team wasn't Montreal. But look, 11 penalties, 5 of them coming on the defense. You got to clean that up. That's way too much. Start with the discipline and other success is going to come. But they're going to be in tough against a really good Hamilton team, especially on the offense. Also, here's an easy one for you. Get Duron Carter out of the secondary. He's an offensive playmaker. That's where he needs to be. I don't care if he wants to play defense. He's not a D-back. He got burned for another big touchdown in that game, which we'll talk about a little more when we talk about Montreal. Get him out of the secondary. Put him back at wide receiver where he's one of the most dynamic playmakers in the league, because now you're going to need that. The Roughriders are 7-point dogs at home in this game. That is really rough. Total for the game is set at 50. I can't take Saskatchewan after a performance like that. Even though the game's in Saskatchewan, I got to take Hamilton in this game. Look, Masoli's playing really well. Hamilton on the offense in general is playing really well. I can't take Saskatchewan until I see them start to clean some of this stuff up and see if they can figure out a quarterback that can actually play. So we're going to take Hamilton in this game, and I'm going to take Hamilton to cover the -7 because Saskatchewan's defense is good, but I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I think it stays under the 50 points, but I got Hamilton winning and covering. Ottawa and Montreal coming up next, and these are 2 teams that technically after last week going in different directions. Montreal got their first win. Ottawa dropped a game, but it was against Calgary. Again, REDBLACKS coming off a 24-14 loss against the Stampeders, but everybody's lost against the Stampeders so far this season. Trevor Harris, a quarterback, wasn't quite good enough. He just wasn't good enough in that game to give the REDBLACKS a chance to upset Calgary. Was only 13 of 29. That's only 45%. Only threw for $135. Did throw an interception. Did not pick up any yards in the rushing game, and Trevor Harris can usually run a little bit. Was also sacked 3 times, so the REDBLACKS offensive line didn't exactly do him any favors by keeping him protected. William Powell at running back for the REDBLACKS really was the only reason, in my opinion anyway, that game was competitive. He had 123 yards on just 13 carries and had multiple big first down runs consecutively. Like he'd run for a first down, his next rush he'd run for a first down, and then he'd run for another one. So he was the only reason that Ottawa had any chance in this game, and really the only reason that it was only a 10-point loss. REDBLACKS also had a big reason for optimism in their secondary. They had a pair of DBs who were making plays all night. Antoine Pruneau, 9 tackles to lead that game. One of them came on special teams. Rico Murray had the 1 interception of Bo Levi Mitchell in that game. So they had some playmakers in the secondary and certainly had a playmaker in the run game. Just wasn't quite enough for him to keep pace against Calgary last week. I don't think they really have anything to hang their heads about. Hey, we won a game, 23-17 against Saskatchewan, win number 1 on the season. And I will give the Alouettes credit here. It's the first game where their defense actually showed up. 4 interceptions in that game, as we mentioned, 2 coming off of each quarterback. So look, 4 picks, that's 4 turnovers. Cha-ching. In the linebacking core, Chris Akey, as well as defensive back Brandon Dozier, they each had 7 tackles in that game. Just when you have something to cheer about, though, something else comes along to kick you in the teeth. Quarterback Drew Willie joining the early season concussion parade in the CFL. He leaves in the third quarter under concussion protocol. When he left, he was only 8 for 15, 157 yards. He had thrown a touchdown and added 12 yards on 3 carries. So he was having a decent game, but just another one going down to this weird early season rash of concussions and head injuries. Now, we talked about Duron Carter when we talked about Saskatchewan getting burned for a long touchdown. Well, that was off of wide receiver Chris Williams for Montreal. Was a big left sideline 79-yard touchdown catch and run late in the first half. Duron Carter looked absolutely lost. But man, big up to Chris Williams. He beat that secondary, and he beat a pretty damn fast player down the left sideline. Montreal will need about 40 of those big plays if they want to have a chance to beat Ottawa, even though the game is in Montreal. Gotta go Red Blacks here. Top to bottom, the Red Blacks are just a better football team on offense, on defense, on special teams. They're a lot more disciplined. Ottawa's going to win this game. I'm going to take the Red Blacks over the Alouettes straight up. I got Ottawa covering the -6.5. Montreal's a 6.5 point dog here at home. The game total is 48. I think it goes over that because I think Ottawa's going to run up their points. I don't see Montreal putting up a good defensive performance 2 weeks in a row. But I got Ottawa covering that because it's less than a touchdown, so we'll certainly take that. Thank you very much. So Ottawa wins straight up. Red Blacks cover the -6.5. Game goes over 48.5 points. Time called because we're going to take a second to plug our good friends at Nerd Teas. Again, I feel bad that I don't have an actual cup of delicious, delicious Nerd Tea. Just didn't quite have enough prep time this morning. But look, a lot of the Nerd Teas blends are absolutely delicious, whether it's hot or cold. Nerdteas.ca. Use the promo code BWFinest. It's going to save you 15% at checkout. If you're in Canada, free shipping on any order over $50. If you're one of my friends from the good old US of A, by the way, happy July 4th to all of my American friends today. Look, if you're in the States, you're going to get a great conversion on the US dollar. Try yourself out some Nerd Teas. Maybe you don't feel quite so patriotic because it's Canadian, but look, it's delicious, and that's all that matters. Nerdteas.ca, promo code BWFinest. Let's go to Toronto now, where the Eskimos are going to be in town. Edmonton coming off of a big 41-22 win over BC, nearly doubling up the Lions. But interestingly enough, kind of a slow start here for Mike Riley, which we're not used to seeing. In the first quarter, he only had 2 pass completions. That is very uncharacteristic of Mike Riley, but by the end of the game, it was a classic Mike Riley game. Very strong finish. 22 of 30 to finish the game. That's 73%. We never hate that. 326 yards. He found the end zone 3 times. Now, he did throw 2 picks. That's more picks. He's throwing more picks this season than I would like to see from him. I think he's got 5 now on the season, but he did add 15 yards on 8 carries and only naturally a short yardage rushing touchdown. Not to be outdone in the run game by his own quarterback, running back C.J. Gable had himself a hell of a game. He found the end zone and he piled up 172 total yards, touching the ball 24 times. That's how you get one of your best playmakers involved in the game. Feed him touches. Riley spread the ball out very well in the pass game. 3 different receivers for the Eskimos that had at least 5 catches and 65 yards. 3 different receivers scoring touchdowns in that game. And on the defensive side, Christophe Mulumba, and I believe that's how you properly pronounce the name, Christophe Mulumba, 7 total tackles, one of them coming on special teams. Not to mention he sacked Jonathan Jennings in that game, not once, but twice. Argonauts coming off the bye from last week, but also coming off of that big 41-7 loss against the Calgary Stampeders in week 2, in which they did lose Ricky Ray, and the news is bad. Ricky Ray is all but certainly done for the season. Again, that was just such a weird play. It was a weird hit, a weird fall. He just kind of got sandwiched, and it's just the worst possible scenario for the Argonauts in terms of even thinking of attempting to defend the Grey Cup championship. James Franklin at quarterback came on in relief in that game. He was 8 for 13. That's 62%. You'd like to see it a little bit higher, but at least it's not crazy low. But he only put up 65 yards off of those 8 completions. No touchdowns, no picks. He did score a rushing touchdown, picking up 14 yards on 3 carries. James Wilder Jr. did have himself a decent game for the Argos in that Week 2 game. 14 touches, got himself 90 yards, and was one of only 2 receivers, along with Brian Times, to have at least 30 yards in the receiving game. Obviously, James Franklin is not going to be a great option for the Argos going forward. Alden Darby in the secondary for the Argonauts had a game-leading 7 tackles, but look, that was a game where they were outthrown, outrushed, outperformed, and unfortunately out-healthed, I guess, if we can put it that way. Look, I feel terrible that they've lost Ricky Ray, but I think that's probably the season for them. Despite not having Ricky Ray, Toronto are only 4.5-point dogs in this game at home. Total in the game is set at 53 points. I just don't see a path for Toronto winning this game. I didn't see enough from James Franklin to make me think that he's going to come in and beat even an Eskimos defense that's been a little suspect this season. But I got to take Edmonton in this game on the road in Toronto to beat the Argos. I'm going to take Edmonton to cover -4.5 because it's way less than a touchdown, so we're definitely going to take that. But I think the game stays under 53 points because I don't know what we're going to get from the Argos offense. And the last game we got on the docket this week is the BC Lions traveling to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers. We'll start with BC, obviously coming off of the aforementioned 41-22 loss against the Eskimos. Jonathan Jennings did not look very good in that game. 13 of 24, that's only 54%. We got to have better from the quarterback position. 199 yards. Obviously, you'd like that number to bare minimum start with a 2. Did not find the end zone, but he did find an Eskimos player for an interception. That is his first interception of the season. We talked about it. He led the CFL in interceptions last season. And on his career, 43 games in the CFL, 45 interceptions. That's slightly better than 1 interception per game. He's got to do better protecting the football. He did, at the very least, add 34 yards on 5 carries. At the very least for the Lions, if they're not getting it done in the pass game, they can definitely get it done on the ground. Jeremiah Johnson at running back, as well as backup quarterback Cody Fajardo. They both scored rushing touchdowns in that game, and as a team, the BC Lions picked up 120 yards on 19 carries and those 2 rush touchdowns, so they can at least show that they can run the football a bit. I don't often talk about kickers, but I do have to mention the kicker for the BC Lions, and usually if you mention kickers, it's because they're either perfect or had a real bad game. Ty Long, who's the kicker for the BC Lions, only went 2 for 4. Both of his field goal misses come from inside the 40. You'd think if you get inside the 40, should be almost automatic if you're a professional kicker. Solomon Elimimian, who we've mentioned a few times now, on the defensive side at linebacker, 10 tackles in that game. Believe that was the game high. And BC playing a little bit more undisciplined than I'm sure they would certainly like to. 11 penalties in that game, 5 coming on the defense. We look at the Blue Bombers now. Actually, both of these teams coming into this game coming off of losses. Winnipeg losing that 31-17 game against Hamilton. Chris Streveler, probably more dangerous at the quarterback position, at least certainly in that game last week, with his feet than he was with his arm. He only went 17 of 30. That's only 57%. It's less than 60. It's less than you want to see. And only threw for 146 yards. That's fewer than 10 yards per completion. So Streveler, gotta let loose a little bit, buddy. Gotta air that ball out a little bit more. But added 55 yards on just 5 carries, 11 yards per carry for Streveler, and found the end zone on his feet. Speaking of on his feet, Andrew Harris, running back for Winnipeg, kind of that do-it-all Swiss Army knife type of running back. 17 total touches, 83 yards in that game against Hamilton. He had a rush touchdown. He leads the CFL in carries, but he's only found the end zone just that one time from last week. I don't necessarily think this is going to get exploited this week, but Winnipeg's really got to look at that defense, man. They allowed 480 total yards of offense. Adam Big Hill in the linebacker core, he had 10 tackles. He was doing his job. He was in there making plays. He leads the CFL in tackles with 22, I believe 21 natural on defense. They allowed 7.2 yards per play on first down. And think about this, if you're the opposing football team, especially if you only play 3-down football like they do in the CFL, imagine your average second down is second and less than 3. And like we mentioned, where Hamilton was so good with time of possession, obviously there's the opposite side to that coin. Winnipeg only possessed the ball for 22 minutes and 30 seconds. That's not going to be good enough. Your defense gets worn out. You give up 480 yards and 30 points. Tough to win a game. Winnipeg comes into this game as a 4-point favorite at home, the only home team this week to actually be a favorite in their football game, with the total set at 53.5. Top to bottom here, I do think Winnipeg's the better football team. I don't trust BC at all in terms of being able to protect the football. I just feel like Jonathan Jennings is going to throw at least one interception. Winnipeg's defense can be good. They didn't really show it last week. I think they have a bounce back game at home. Got to take the Blue Bombers here at home to beat BC. I'm going to take Winnipeg to cover that -4 just because it's only 4 points. It's not that many. CFL is a fairly high-scoring league, and I expect the game to go over the 53.5 point total. So we like Winnipeg straight up to cover the -4 as well, and to go over 53.5. All right, folks, that's your Week 4 games, and we're going to go over our predictions here with you one more time. I've got Hamilton on the road in Saskatchewan, beating the Roughriders straight up. I've got Hamilton covering the -7 points on the line in a game that stays under 50 points total. I've got Ottawa on the road in Montreal, beating the Alouettes straight up. And I've got Ottawa covering the -6.5 that they are favored on the line in a game that goes over 48.5. I've got Edmonton hitting the road, beating Toronto in Toronto. I've got Edmonton covering -4.5 on the line in a game that stays under 53 points. And the only home team to win in Week 4, I've got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home to beat the BC Lions. I've got Winnipeg covering -4 on the line in a game that goes over 53.5 points. I just realized I've got all the favorites against the spread. All right, folks, that is going to do it for the Week 4 episode of the CFL Picks Show for the 2018 regular season. Here's hoping no more quarterbacks get concussed. Now, I'm going to get this video done, get it uploaded, and then jack that air conditioner up to the max. Enjoy the games in Week 4. Try to stay cool. If you're an American viewer, happy 4th of July. Have a great day. Be safe, but have some fun. And we'll see you again in Week 5.